Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Young. I'm going to walk you through the global economy, the risk and threats. Here's a little bio about myself. I'm a CPA CGA by trade. I focus on a wide spectrum of topics and area. I have over close to 30 years experience in different areas, so I'm going to give you a little different view of what's going on in the world. I'm going to keep things at a high level. I'm only going to talk about critical issues like GDP growth, carbon tax, housing affordability. I'm going to talk about global trade, wages, etc. Why do I think we're heading to a perfect storm? You have the two major trading partners in the world that are in kind of fighting global trade issues. That's China and the U.S. And that basically has a ripple effect down to other countries because basically everybody else is looking in terms of the different aspects of their economy. So they're trying to look at different things too and how they basically are going to expand exports, break down internal issues from trade barriers within as well as trade barriers internationally. Now, GDP forecast is predicted to slide globally to about 3.3 to 3.4% for 2019. It's marginally down, but it's something that you need to watch because the global economy's got many different facets to it. Plus, the other issue that comes into it, the supply chain is so integrated now, so it's very important to understand what's going on both domestically and internationally. Why did I bring in carbon tax? The big push around the world is Agenda 2030, which is the UN's pushing of one world government and sustainability. Part of that sustainability means is they're trying to push any sort of form of carbon tax or carbon pricing. The problem is carbon tax, carbon pricing hasn't really basically did much to reduce emissions. It's been more of a tax grab, and it's made the everyday life of people more expensive. It's also had an impact GDP-wise, and it's caused slower growth in areas. That being said, for carbon tax to be effective, you'd have to make it something like $4,400 per ton. And no government's going to do that because it basically would destroy your economy. Housing affordability is a big issue right now. There's systemic issues facing real estate around from land cost to permits to interest rates to lack of urban planning. There's just a significant number of issues with it. A lot of the household budget is tied up in housing cost. We're now heading for a period where we're actually going to see a rise in interest rates, which is going to put a dent into household budgets. So if you're consuming more of your interest costs, that means less money for other things, especially consumer spending. I put top exporting countries here because it just gives you an idea, $1 billion percentages, right? And you can see right now where I've listed China and the U.S. as 1, 2. That's significant because those are the two countries that are struggling with issues around trade. Nobody has issues with trade between countries. What people have concerned about is fair trade. The whole context of making fair trade really means you need to ensure that you deal with countries, but they have equal access of your goods into their market as well as you allow equal access to their goods into your market. In a lot of cases with some countries is they put restriction on what foreign investment can leave the country and how much you can basically import into that country. The other thing to the far right-hand side gives you a quick look at GDP rates. What you're seeing in general is sluggish growth in 2019. This kind of gives you a little bit more of a focus on both consumer pricing as well as growth. So we had a couple of periods of strong global growth led by China from 2000 to 2017. We're actually shaving off a small percentage of it. And if you see, we're actually almost shaving a half a point of GDP by 2020 globally. So there are significant challenges ahead of us. And it's something that it shouldn't be taken lightly. Wage growth. This is a big issue. It's been an ongoing issue for probably a better part of 3 decades. But basically, wages aren't necessarily keeping pace with inflation. And this kind of gives you that chart. We're in a period of stagnated wages. Does that affect everybody? No. I think you'll see some industries and even the government sector that are not the trend. There basically will be one off, but it's something that you need to bear in mind. I brought in the WTO reforms. Now, there was a big meeting in December where Canada got together with a few countries to talk about WTO reforms. Now, the issue that I'll raise here quickly, and I'll be succinct about it, is the WTO sits there as part of a group to help better support globalization of trade. The problem is emerging markets have not adopted a lot of the measures that the WTO wants countries to follow. China is one of the more guilty of doing it, but India and other countries are as well because they want the capital, but they don't necessarily want to basically open up equal and unfettered access to their markets. The other problem is China does not act in a full democracy. It basically supports its businesses through subsidies, which tend to be unfair treatment of how they support their industries compared to how imports would be coming into that country. Rise of global protectionism. This has been going on for at least a couple of years now. I've been following the trend. Different governments come into power, and it's all about how do you support the goods producing sector. And the reason why that's important, it drives a lot of private sector investment. It also drives in taxation dollars, right? So you want to have a good goods producing sector. So that's why this is an issue. The other issue too that it's not easy to break down barriers is because the supply chains are so integrated, and this has to do with a lot of the work that's been done over the last 30 years. There's taxation pressures. All governments still can keep looking at different ways to tax people. It's never been about efficient or value for money services. It's all about tax dollars and how do you basically increase tax dollars. It's also about the messaging that a lot of governments do that they care about income inequality. But one-off policies never do anything in terms of the overall support of any sort of poverty, inequality, or growing of a middle class. It's multiple policies that basically support that growth in those areas or changes in those areas. I just put the stock market here. Last year, 2018, was one of the worst records for stock market. A lot of it had to do with global pressure from protectionism. We also seen a lot of geopolitical events coming into play. Iran's become a big threat in the Middle East, so we're seeing some of that rise. We're also seeing issues with stability in Europe in terms of government handling immigration. So there's a lot of factors going into why the markets struggle. The sad thing is with the market being down, it puts pressures on pensions because a good chunk of the pensions are invested in the stock markets around the world. Why did I bring up rise in eco-terrorism? Because we're having an era where we're seeing more and more issues happening that are being triggered by terrorism, whether that's forest fires, whether that's radical activism. We're seeing certain things that the radical left seems to want to control the agenda, and they're using a lot of negativity and using very bizarre tactics to achieve that end goal. Conclusion. Basically, 2019 just started. It's very hard to predict anything because things can change on a dime. What you can look at right now is we're seeing drops in the oil price market, commodities. We're seeing a rise in risk of households' affordability. So we're seeing a bunch of things. It's a perfect storm. Globalized debt's becoming a big issue, and it's something that needs to be identified, particularly in China right now, where they've built up areas where their vacancies are about 12%. That can lead into significant issues in terms of defaults. So there is some concerns with rising interest rates on the default of debt. That's a thing. The other thing around that you're dealing with is unless India, China, and emerging markets start to adopt WTO mandated approaches to making trade more fair between countries, then you're going to run into risks. Poverty will not be eliminated by one-off policies. Every government tries to think they're going to eliminate it, but you're not. What you have to do is a strong economy dictates that, and you have to make sure that you do the right support of social policies to encourage people to get off welfare and social system, but also provide the support to the people that need it the most. So, in essence, what I'm saying here is 2019 is going to be a very turbulent year. It wouldn't surprise me that we see possible recessions in countries like Canada, probably France, and a few other places in Europe, Argentina and stuff, because we're hitting to an end of an economic cycle that's been on go probably for a good 10 years now. And it's rare to see an economic cycle go beyond 10 years in economic growth. This presentation is to give you a quick overview of the global economy. It's something that basically allows you as a business manager or ownership or investor to kind of look at things, to kind of get an idea and a perspective of what's going on and around the world, what might impact your company both domestically and internationally. Thank you.